Welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott, coming at you guys with a solo recap video today. So we're going to be looking into what happened in week one from a snap share perspective, from a route runs perspective, from a targets perspective. And so, you might be able to get this in other places. I'm going to be referencing PFF for this information. I think a lot of you will also be getting, going over the stats and what happened from a, good and bad perspective, from each player, but the roles that these guys were playing, how often they were on the field, I think that's really important information. That's something that's maybe a little bit less easily accessible. So I wanted to go over each game. I'm going to go through all of the games from Thursday all the way through Sunday. So I'm recording this on Monday. We will not have the Monday night data in this episode. So without further ado, let's get into each of these games. So the first one we're going to start with here is the Kansas City Chiefs snap counts. So obviously you see Rashee Rice dominated the snap counts from the wide receiver group. He ran the same number of routes as Xavier Worthy, but also tripled him in targets. It was very clear from the very beginning that he was going to be the number one target. It was, he had like 4 receptions in the first quarter. I was like, oh man, I should have got more Rashee Rice for sure. But this was good to see, obviously, for all Rashee Rice owners. And I do think without Hollywood Brown, these numbers down with Justin Watson, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Sky Moore, I do think that at least one of those guys is going to be inactive on game days once Hollywood Brown is healthy. So, Rashee Rice, I do think Worthy with the 3 targets, obviously he had a carry and 2 touchdowns. So 4 touches. I do hope to see as the season goes on that he gets a little bit more involved with the targets, because that's not a very big target share at all. And without the touchdowns, he really wouldn't have had that good of a game. But, with how explosive he is, with how fast he is, you saw in the end rounds, just nobody could touch him when he had a clear lane into the end zone. So I do think he's going to be worth a start moving forward. And you see Travis Kelce was out there a ton, right? I mean, he was out there almost over 90% of the snaps. From you see Mahomes had 54. That would be the total number of snaps they played. And then also looking down at the running backs, right, you got Isaiah Pacheco, who dominated the snaps, 43 snaps. He ran 22 routes to Samaje Perine's 8. I know they were 3-2 in targets, but I really don't think Samaje Perine's going to be that much of a threat unless he does start to play more snaps, right? If he's only going to play 8 snaps, he ran a route on all of his snaps. I just don't think that role is going to affect Pacheco's upside in the passing game that much, really. So I think that was good to see from a snap perspective that Isaiah Pacheco is going to still continue to be that workhorse. On the other side of the ball in this game, we have the Ravens. So from the wide receiver room, you can see it was really Zay Flowers and Bateman. Obviously, Bateman got a lot of hype, but not very many targets for how many snaps he played and how many routes he ran. Really only 4 targets. He got a couple deep shots, and he did get loose for one of his deep shots. He had like a 40-yard reception. So, his role, he did okay. But Zay Flowers, obviously the 9 targets, 6 receptions, didn't turn that into a lot of yards. He had less than 40 yards. But I do think overall that this was encouraging from Flowers to be used this heavily. And I do think moving forward, he should see his yardages increase. The main storyline from this game, obviously, was Isaiah Likely. 12 targets on 53 snaps. Him and Mark Andrews played a lot together. Andrews actually did play more snaps and ran more routes than Likely, but only 2 targets to Likely's 12. I'm not entirely sure what to make of that, right? Obviously, Likely is going to be a very hot waiver wire priority. I do think that Andrews is going to get more involved in the offense. I think, he got in a car accident 2.5 weeks before this game. He really wasn't a part of a lot of the practices leading up. He was questionable even throughout the first week, showed up on the injury report. So I do expect that Andrews gets more involved in the passing game here, and it's not going to be 12 targets for Likely and 2 for Andrews very often moving forward. And then the running backs, I think we did get a very, very big surprise here with Justice Hill playing so many snaps and running so many routes and being so heavily involved in the passing game, right? 6 targets in the passing game. And, he looked good. He looked good with the ball in the backfield. He was definitely a security blanket for Lamar Jackson. And so, the fact that he played more snaps, they played together, him and Derrick Henry, a little bit. But I do think in games where they're trailing, that this might be, again, similar to how Henry was used last year, that he might end up seeing less playing time when Baltimore's behind. Now, thankfully for Henry owners, Baltimore's not going to be behind very often, right? So Henry should be getting much bigger workloads than 13 carries and a target moving forward. He did score in this game, so if you started him, he probably bailed you out decently. And I think overall, you can still continue to start Derrick Henry. I will say that I do think, based on the usage, that he's probably going to be more of a top 15 running back than a top 10 running back, like I had hoped. But with that 20 touchdown upside ceiling, I do still think that, he'll have a lot of big weeks. When he goes over 102 touchdowns, we'd be very happy that year. All right, so the Eagles, right? So we got Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown playing on almost all of the snaps. Devontae Smith actually did play every snap. A.J. Brown took only a couple off. They both ran 39 routes. They both had 8 and 9 targets, basically the same workload. The main thing from the wide receiver room that I thought was great is in 11 personnel, when Dotson was on the field, right? You see he only was playing 32 snaps, so less than half of the snaps he was in there for. But in those personnel, it was great to see that Smith was in the slot for 75% of those snaps. So I do think if he's going to play in the slot, 25 snaps a game, that's going to increase his opportunities to get some easier targets, get away from maybe a little bit better coverage. And I do think that Smith is in a great spot here. I really hope if you have him, you're going to be starting him. There's a very strong role for him. From the tight ends, right, you have Goddard that was out there as much as he could handle, ran as many routes as he could handle. The 4 targets were good, but those all came early in the game, and he kind of faded away as the game went on. So I do hope to see that he can have maybe a little bit more consistent role throughout the entire game. And then the news story of this offense was obviously Saquon Barkley. 61 out of the 76 snaps, got 26 routes. He had 24 carries. Obviously caught a touchdown up the left sideline and had 2 more on the ground. This was an excellent role for him. If you drafted him thinking that he was going to be featured, he scored twice inside the 5-yard line on the ground. This is exactly what you wanted to see in week 1. I had him as my RB4 coming into the year, and I feel very strongly, I have a very strong confirmation bias on his role here. Packers, other side of the ball here, right? We have Dobbs, Reed, Watson, and Wicks all kind of mixing in the wide receiver room, which is what we expected to see. Dobbs dominated the snaps. And, this is kind of what happened last year too, right? Where he was playing over 85% of the snaps most weeks. And it looks like that's going to continue here, right? And Jaden Reed wasn't on the field to start the game, but as you can see, second in snaps, second in routes run, obviously had very high value carries targets down the field. So his 6 targets were great. He scored on his rush attempt. So, he just was all over the field, basically. Explosive player, very, very talented player. This is who I wanted out of these 4 receivers. And so it was good to see him have a good week 1. Now, obviously it was a bummer. Yeah, Jordan Love got hurt at the end of the game, right? He's got the MCL sprain. He's going to be out 3 to 6 weeks. So I'm not entirely sure how much the usage is going to matter here, because the quarterback play, if it's going to be Malik Willis for that whole time, he's going to be so poor. He's started 3 games in his career. He's never had 100 passing yards. So he's going to have made major strides moving forward. He's very new to this team and offense. And so I'm not big on him. Looking at the tight ends here now, right? So I kind of jumped around a little bit, but the tight ends, I think, obviously here is a major story, because Luke Musgrave was a sleeper for a lot of people, only played 17 snaps to Tucker Kraft's 64. There is no doubt, based on this usage, who the number 1 tight end is here. And if you drafted Luke Musgrave, if you have Luke Musgrave in Dynasty, maybe you hang on to Musgrave in Dynasty because he is young, but Kraft is somebody, if you need a tight end, that you should be looking into. You can throw a $0 waiver bid. If you have deep benches and you need a bench tight end, I would throw a bid at him, because I do think with 30 routes run, he ran more routes than Reed and Watson. There is a role here for him that he could potentially grow into a bigger target share. So get Kraft on the end of your benches in deep leagues. And then Josh Jacobs, I mean, nothing more to say here. I mean, Wilson got the explosive plays early in the game. He had like his first 3 carries went for 30 yards, and you're looking at Jacobs like 9 for 18. And you're like, come on. And then in the second half, Jacob broke off a couple big runs. He had a good catch, right? And so with 16 carries and 3 targets, that's 19 opportunities. That's what you're looking for. I think he's going to even continue to grow into a bigger workload here as well. If Love is going to be out, they're going to have to lean on their running game and short passing game even that much more. And so I think Jacobs moving forward is going to see even a huge, bigger workload on the ground here. The snap share, 49 out of the 67 snaps is an awesome roll. All right, Atlanta Falcons. Drake London obviously had a miserable game, right? But he played 100% of the snaps. He ran 28 routes, had 4 targets. I don't think that Kirk Cousins is going to struggle that much. They had a very difficult matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so I do expect that Drake London moving forward is not going to see very many 2 for 15 games out of him. So I'm not worried yet about Drake London. I would say that it's probably going to be one of those situations where you wish you drafted Mike Evans, but in general, I still expect him to be a top 15 receiver. Kyle Pitts, great to see him get in the end zone. Still only 3 targets, but he's out there on 100% of the plays, ran all the routes, same as London. And so I do think overall, if you have Pitts, you feel decently about it. The tight ends were miserable in week 1. I mean, so bad. And he was really the only one in the top 8 that even scored a touchdown. So, feel good about Pitts this week of what you got, and hope that the overall offense for the Falcons looks a little better here. I mentioned Cousins. He was terrible in this game, but I think the defense that he was playing against kind of reflects that. First game back from an Achilles. Really, he tore it, only 8 months ago. So I think overall, you can expect his play to get much better moving forward from here. And then the Bijan-Algier split. I know people were worried about Algier, but 10 snaps, 3 routes, and only 3 carries. 23 opportunities for Bijan. This is his role. This is his backfield, and you're going to feel very good about having spent an early first-round pick on him. On the Steelers side, right, Van Jefferson out there running routes, right? Somebody's got to run in the number 2 spot, but, only 1 target, 1 carry. Not really a role there for Van Jefferson. George Pickens, very strong role. Played a few less snaps, but from a guy that runs deep a lot, you're going to expect him to be off the field, at least a little bit as he catches his breath. They're going to have running plays where he's not going to be out there. So I'm not super worried about him having less than Van Jefferson. That's kind of expected. 7 targets, very strong role. So if you have Pickens, make sure you get him in your lineups, especially in good matchups, especially against beatable corners deep. And Russell Wilson will be back next week, I hope, maybe the week after. Justin Fields isn't great as a passer, so I think that overall kind of plays into it as well. Freiermuth out there for 51 snaps, right? That's a very strong role. 21 routes, 4 targets. That's great, right? That's what you're looking for. He just signed a 4-year, $48 million deal right before this game as well. So, they paid him. They're going to use him. I do think with Russell Wilson that he should be additionally better than this, right? I'm not worried about the rest of the tight end snaps, right? They run a lot of 2 and 3 tight end snaps. Sets, right, and Washington specifically is just a massive body that helps block. Can get out on routes, but you even see he only had 7 routes run. So that's more of like, just giving the defense something else to look at every once in a while throughout the game. Fields, he had 11 carries. He was okay, but I don't think he's going to be the starter for very long. The backfield here, I think, was a big story, right? I mean, the fact that Najee had, 50% more, 8% more snaps than Jaylen Warren, plus he ran more routes, plus he out-carried him 20-2. I mean, maybe it's Warren's hamstring injury, but if this is going to be the breakdown, you're going to wish you had drafted Najee. And so if you can, go get him, because, he only had 70 yards, didn't score, 2 catches, that didn't do a ton. Maybe people think Jaylen Warren's just coming back, but I would go try and get Najee if you can on the cheap this week. Arizona Cardinals, this one, major storyline from the wide receiver room. I mean, Marvin Harrison played the most snaps, ran the most routes, only saw 3 targets and only had 1 catch for 4 years. Such a disappointing game here from Marvin Harrison Jr. in his first game. I really, really hope that he's more heavily targeted moving forward. I don't know if it was just a thing where this was like, get a feel for the offense and throw it to Greg George short a bunch and try to just, get it going a little bit against the Bills. Don't challenge them deep. Don't make mistakes. But, it's also hard to argue because they did put up 28 points. And although, Kyler did miss Marv at the end of the game for what could have been the game-winning touchdown, overall, just a very disappointing game there from Harrison. And you see Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch. I mean, Greg Dortch with the 8 targets. If you play in a deep league, you're in a guillotine league where, you have 17 teams, you're looking for a flex. He's somebody that you can plug in right now, because if he's going to see that level of usage close to the line of scrimmage, he's going to have a decent floor of, at least some points in these super deep leagues. From a tight end perspective, it's McBride, 9 targets, looked great. He didn't have a ton of yards or anything, but that's going to change. They're going to be better than this from a passing game perspective. And I think McBride's locked in. I don't think you have anything to worry about there. And then James Conner, it is good to see, not that this was in question, but it's very good to see him dominate the snaps, dominate the routes run, dominate the carries, right? All the trifecta. Not super efficient in this game, but again, Bills defense, he still scored the touchdown. Very strong game from a fantasy perspective. So on the Bills side of the ball, right, we saw basically how we thought it would break down, except for Matt Collins got in there a lot at wide receiver, and he scored. So I think it was interesting to see, because I hadn't even really considered him as somebody who's going to be on the field. So that's definitely something that you want to keep an eye on from a, from a snap share perspective, right? Because if Curtis Samuel is only going to play 17 snaps, or if this is going to be 4 wide receivers that are getting on the field, it's going to be tough to kind of trust any of these guys until we see one emerge moving forward. Dalton Kincaid was out there. He had a miserable game, only 1 target, 1 catch. Dawson Knox also out there a decent amount, but I would expect Kincaid to get significantly more involved moving forward. Josh Allen was awesome. Hopefully you drafted him as QB1, 2 passing, 2 rushing touchdowns. I don't think there's going to be that much rushing production necessarily every week. Obviously, he's not going to be scoring 2 rushing touchdowns, but I think as the passing game continues to pick up, as the roles kind of become more defined and more clear, I think he also improves through the air moving forward. James Cook, very dominant role. He played inside the 10-yard line a lot. He was in there for 4 or 5 snaps. So I do think that there's a chance that he does score a little bit more than maybe we were expecting, because I think that was mainly what was holding down his projection, right? We kind of had him for 1,500 yards, but only maybe 4 to 6 touchdowns. So, with Josh Allen scoring the rushing touchdowns close, that's obviously not great for James Cook, but there is, I think, a little bit of opportunity if he is going to be playing inside the 10, inside the 5, that he does come into a little bit more scoring this year. Chicago Bears, DJ Moore had 49 snaps, but he was also in and out of the game. He got banged up and still only managed to miss 7 snaps. So he's obviously the one here. Most routes run, most targets, this has Keenan Allen at 8 targets, and I'm pretty sure Keenan Allen had 11 targets. So I take that back. DJ Moore had 8, but I'm pretty sure that's wrong actually on this graphic. Keenan Allen had 11 targets, but the passing game here, I would not panic on. Caleb Williams was terrible today. He had 29 attempts and only threw for 93 yards. That is less than 4 yards attempt. That is terrible, terrible, terrible quarterback play. The only reason the Bears won this game was because of their defense and special teams. So, just don't panic on these guys. The target distribution, I think, was good. Rome Odunze's first game, you're not expecting a major production from him anyways, So I would say don't necessarily fret on these wide receivers yet and go right back to DJ Moore and Keenan Allen next week. Gerald Everett and Cole Kmet, this is what I've been warning about all offseason. We had a, waiver wire episode before week 1 that said, if you have Cole Kmet, go ahead and cut him. He's at 75% rostered. So I expect that to go back down to like 25% this week. If you have him, please cut him. And this is why Gerald Everett played on more snaps, ran more routes, and they each got 1 target. That is not something you want any part of at tight end. Go get Isaiah Likely, go get Tyler Kraft, go get anybody else at tight end, or use that spot on J.K. Dobbins, use that spot on, Puka got hurt, so Ty Johnson, or if Demarcus Robinson's still out there, go get one of those guys. Like, this is not a situation you want any part of. And then the running backs, Swift dominated the touches here and the backfield, 10 touches to 2 for some of these other guys. I don't really think that this is a debate. It's going to be Swift, and I don't know that that's going to mean much. I mean, he was terrible. So he had 10 carries for 30 yards and didn't get a catch. So, if he's not going to be getting anything in the passing game, and he's not going to be efficient on the ground or get more volume than this, he's not going to be worth starting. From the Titans' perspective, wide receivers up top, obviously the thing that stands out the most is DeAndre Hopkins with 17 snaps. So he's playing with a torn MCL. And the fact that he didn't get that repaired when it happened, in the offseason, I'm not sure I necessarily understand that decision. This is not something that's going to heal on its own. This needs surgery to heal correctly. And so I don't know if he just didn't want to miss, he's getting older, obviously. He didn't want to miss this season, or, he didn't want to come back in like week 8 or 9, or I don't know where he sees his career kind of going after this. This is not something that I think necessarily is going to change. If he has this pain tolerance all year, right? It's just how much he can get out there. And then the very first attempt at it was 17. Like maybe it goes up into half of the snaps or something. But this is something that you want to monitor very closely if you have DeAndre Hopkins. And if this continues at all, even week 2, week 3, I personally, if I had him, I'd be cutting him. I don't have him anywhere because I was nervous about the injury, and Calvin Ridley, I think, was more of the target for me. But this is not something I want any part of. And if you do see this continue to be an issue of him just even getting on the field at all, you want to go get Tyler Boyd. Because look, he had 6 targets in his first game here. Will Levis was terrible, right, in this game. But he can be better. He did show flashes. And so I do think that Boyd, as the slot receiver underneath, can still have a role here and can help you during bye weeks. And I think he's somebody that you can maybe go get based on how much he played. If he's going to be out there for 90% of the snaps, that's somebody that you want to. The backfield here, the tight ends don't matter for fantasy purposes. The backfield here, looking at Tony Pollard and Spears, right? Pollard, they got pretty close to splitting, but Pollard dominated the carries. I mean, 16-4, and he got hot early. He scored on the first drive, and that's kind of something we talked about in the offseason is, you take Spears thinking he's the better value, and then Pollard goes out and, if they're splitting back and forth 1-for-1 series, Pollard goes out and dominates a drive. They give it to Spears and they go 3 and out. And then Pollard goes out and dominates the drive. It's like all of a sudden he's getting the momentum in the game and they're just going to ride with him. So if you have Pollard, I do think that you should be starting him next week if you weren't already. He was very productive. He looked very good. And so maybe it was a thing where he was nicked up and dinged up all year last year too, and finally is healthy this year and is going to be more of dominating on the ground here. New England, you don't really need to look at the wide receiver snaps that much. I mean, they all played roughly the same amount. Obviously, we had hyped Jalen Polk, and he did okay. He was 3rd in routes run, but only 1 target. So KJ Osborne was 6 targets. I just don't think that's going to be a thing. I think this is kind of just an outlier week where they got ahead and they hammered it with Ramondre Stevenson. They loaded him up with as much work as he could get, and they were rewarded in a big way for that, right? 25 carries, 3 targets. He had over 140 yards and a touchdown, and they were able to win the game, right? They were able to hold off the Bengals. So I do think that the target share and the snaps were a little bit less important in this game. They weren't trailing. They didn't have to try and come from behind. They weren't trying to move the ball through the air necessarily. 3rd downs, but overall didn't ask for set to do. From the Bengals side, right? Iosivas played the most snaps, got 5 targets, didn't do hardly anything with it. Jamar Chase was terrible in the first half. I think, maybe a pep talk during halftime to get him going, but had 4 or 5 catches in the second half, did much better in the second half. He only had 7 yards in the first half, ended the game with over 60 yards. So he was much better in the second half. I do think he was on a snap count. Again, this you can see clearly he was on a snap count in this game, not being out there 100% of the snaps. So, I think as he comes along from holding out during the offseason, he's going to be right back into that role. Hopefully T. Higgins is okay and can make it back in week 2 or week 3. And I do think that's going to kind of render Iosivas obsolete in the offense. And Trent Irwin will kind of slide into that number 4. And I think Jermaine Burton is the one who's going to be a healthy scratch. So I did hope that if T. Higgins was out, right, that they put Burton into that role. That is not the case at all. He is not going to be playing much this year until he gets to be more reliable. There's a reliability issue with him, falling asleep during meetings and all that kind of stuff, being focused on, the goal of the team and what we're doing here. So what they're trying to accomplish, I should say. So he's not going to be out there, and I would cut Burton if you have him anywhere in redraft. And then From the running back perspective, right, Moss did outsnap Chase Brown by about double. So I do think if you have either of these, you're holding on to him. But if you have Zach Moss, I think you're happy to see this breakdown. You're happy to see that he got some targets. They didn't run the ball very much, and New England was keeping the ball away from them very effectively. They were losing the whole game, so they were having to throw. So, I think the offense is going to be better moving forward. And I think that if Moss is going to have 50% more snaps than Brown, that he's going to be somebody that you're going to end up being able to use. Texans. So this was awesome to see Nico Collins out there for the most snaps, right? He's the deep threat. He runs a lot of deep routes. And so he is the one last year who was running 65, 70% of snaps, but he was out there for the most snaps of anybody. And garnered 8 targets. He had over 100 yards. He had 6 catches for 117 yards. He looked great. Stephon Diggs, also working in the short area, had multiple touchdowns in this game, scored twice. He didn't break 10 yards a catch, but I do think that that's an encouraging role. If he's willing to work in that short area and kind of pull the linebackers in, pull the safeties down closer to the line of scrimmage, because he's going to be dynamic closer to the line of scrimmage. He's going to be able to get into the end zone. This offense is going to be great with him working at the number 2. And you can see here, right, they ran a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, but it's pretty clear that Tank Dell was the third, still garnered 8 targets. So he is not going anywhere. This is somebody that this is super encouraging to see. CJ Stroud loves him. He is getting targeted. You want to keep him in your lineups. Dalton Schultz ran a lot of the routes here. Obviously, you're expecting that out on the field, the same number as Nico Collins, ran a lot of routes. Didn't get targeted a ton. And again, that's kind of what we're saying about how the offense, he's like 4th, maybe even 5th behind Mixon. But, if you have Schultz, hang on to him for now. There might be additional volume coming in a way. They played 80 snaps, so that is quite a bit. But if he can get a little bit bigger target share, he could be useful, because tight ends were horrible this week. And we have injuries, right? Njoku's hurt. Ferguson's hurt. Who knows on Mark Andrews? Like there's all this question at the tight end position. Like so many guys didn't even break 35 yards. Like, just hang on to him if you have him. I would say that, right? I would much rather have him at this point, than Cole Kmet. And there's a chance he ends up being a top 12 tight end here come soon. If there's an injury in week 2, 3, 4, hopefully not. But just saying that he is talented enough to garner a bigger target share as the season goes on. And then Joe Mixon, right? This was an insane role. He played on so many snaps, 57% of the snaps. I mean, nobody else even challenging him at all. 30 touches on the ground, 5.5 a carry, right? 159 rushing yards and a touchdown. This was awesome if you're a Joe Mixon owner. If you're Joe Mixon truther, this is what you wanted to see. Obviously, this channel is not, so it's a little bit of a bummer to see this play out this way for us. But, volume is king, and right, if you're going to get 33 opportunities, you're going to produce. So we'll see how that continues to play out here over the rest of the season. The Colts, so we saw Anthony Richardson make some unbelievable throws, but they just did not play very many snaps on offense. Pittman, obviously most routes out there, got 7 targets. He did decently with the targets, but didn't end up scoring. Alec Pierce caught a long touchdown, and Dublin caught a long touchdown, right? So those were the guys that ended up with the most fantasy points in the wide receiver room. I'm not worried about Pittman seeing 7 targets on the 45 snaps. I think, very, very large target share. And I'm very confident there. Alec Pierce, I think, is going to get replaced in the offense by Josh Downs once he's healthy. So I would not be trying to get Pierce. He did catch that 60-yard touchdown, but I think that'll be Downs' role. And A.D. Mitchell, if you have him, make sure you keep him, and make sure you go and watch the highlights of both touchdown passes that Richardson missed him on. One of them, he was wide open. He could have underthrown the ball by 10 yards. And he launched it out of the back of the end zone. I'm not sure. I think he just got excited and was like, oh, got to get it out there. And Mitchell wasn't able to run under it. But Mitchell looked good. I don't know entirely what his role is going to continue to be, right? 5 targets is pretty good on 45 snaps. But hopefully we see him kind of grow into a little bit bigger role. And I think when Downs gets integrated back into the offense, it's going to be a different look here from snaps and targets. So keep an eye on this situation. No tight end news there. Jonathan Taylor dominates the backfield. Only 16 carries and no targets. They only ran 45 plays, right? So I'm not super worried about that. That's a big workload, right? I mean, on 45 snaps to get 16 carries, that's getting the ball on 35% of the plays on the ground. So I mean, we'll see how this shakes out. I do feel a little vindicated from having Jonathan Taylor as my running back 8 coming into the year. I obviously got him nowhere with having him as running back 8, but no targets is not something you want to see. I know we didn't expect a big passing game role, but 0 is not what you want to start. Dolphins, so Waddle and Tyreek. Waddle was in and out of the game and still was able to out snap Tyreek. So, we'll see on Waddle's injury, check in on that throughout the week. I do hope that he's able to play next week. But Tyreek Hill, obviously, and Waddle, they're so talented. 130 yards and a touchdown for Tyreek, 105 yards for Waddle. And these guys are just the two that you want. And if they're playing, you're starting them. It's just pretty much that simple. Nothing you want at the tight end position. Tua wasn't very good in the first half, but was excellent in the second half. Over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns in the second half. I do think that he's going to be usable if you have him, right? And if you have him in two quarterback leagues, he's a set it, forget it starter. So, very encouraging to see a good game from him there. And Tyreek on 80-yard touchdowns is just like, peanut butter and jelly. It's just they go together so well, and it always happens. So enjoy Tyreek if you have him. From the running backs, right, HN was the guy, 10 carries, 7 catches. I mean, he had 7 catches for 75 yards. You want HN out of this backfield. You're going to be setting and forgetting HN every single time he starts, period. It's not even close. He had a goal line touchdown. Raheem Mostert wasn't even close to as involved. So I think that might get better as the season gets going, get Mostert, kind of get his legs underneath him, but HN's the guy you want. Jaguars, so this is surprising, right, that Gabe Davis, well, not surprising, but this is confirmation of what we saw in the preseason. Gabe Davis and Brian Thomas playing the most snaps with Kirk being third. And Kirk had 4 targets, but only 1 catch. And, Brian Thomas got in the end zone, 4 for 50 and a touchdown, or 47 and a touchdown. Gabe Davis had 3 catches for 62 yards, caught a couple 20-yarders. So I do think that the wide receiver room, it's interesting to see that this is going to play out like this. My opinion is the guy you want here is Brian Thomas Jr. He looked very good. His touchdown was very impressive with Lawrence moving to his left, kind of did the toe tap in the back of the end zone, like ho-hum. We all know Brian Thomas scores touchdowns. Okay, he had 17, led college football last year. So I think this is encouraging to see. If you have any of these guys, you're obviously keeping them at this point after this game. And this isn't a game where Lawrence didn't even play that well. So, make sure you keep these guys on your team if you have them. Engram, super disappointing. Only 1 catch, 5 yards. Like, that is so bad for how good of a role we thought he was going to have. He only played 36% of the snaps, played less than all of the wide receivers. And with turnover in the wide receiver room, you thought maybe the veteran, the guy who's been here, would be the one that gets a lot of the targets. Wasn't the case. So I had Engram as my number 5 tight end. I had pushed him up above Dalton Kincaid, above anybody down there after that first tier of tight end, above Pitts, and so I'm not encouraged by this. You're not doing anything, right? You have Engram, you're going to start him again next week, but this is not a good thing to see. And then in the backfield, right, the ETN played on 20 more snaps, but they split the carries evenly, and Bigsby was significantly better than him on the ground. ETN had 44 yards, Bigsby had 72. I don't think that this is going to be a big negative for ETN. I think it's honestly probably a good thing that Bigsby looks good, right? So they have a complement. They have somebody who played less than half the number of snaps here, and I think overall that this could be good for ETN and the offense in general to have another guy that they can run between the tackles. So I know they split it up. Bigsby got the hot hand. Bigsby got more than you would have liked to see as an ETN owner, but ETN did score the short range touchdown and played way more snaps and got the 3 targets. So I think overall, I feel good about ETN still, but it was a little bit iffy to see Bigsby get so much work and be so successful. And the Saints here, Olave, obviously a terrible game. This is not good. They scored 3 touchdowns. They won by so much, and Olave had 2 for 12. I think it's a buying opportunity on Olave, but it's not encouraging to see him not be involved again. And it's just like, just throw him the ball. 2 targets, like, just get him going, And so I don't know. I'm really hopeful here that he figures it out quickly, right? Because if you drafted him in the 2nd round or 3rd round, this is somebody that you have to get production from in a big way, not just every other week. And you can't really have duds like this if you're going to win. So Shaheed out there was the number 2 wide receiver. Definitely go and get Shaheed if he's on your waiver wire, because he had 5 targets. He had a deep touchdown. He looked great. And if the Saints are going to be down, they're going to have to be throwing. I think Shaheed, in a role where he's playing 45% of the snaps, he's running most of the routes that there are to be ran. He's going to be somebody that can also be productive next to Olave. And I think Derek Carr has shown that he can get him the ball. Tight end, not something you really want to get involved with here other than Taysom Hill, who had 5 carries early and then kind of disappeared. And I say that as Juwan Johnson and Foster Moreau both caught touchdowns, right? So Juwan Johnson, if you're not familiar, is coming off an off-season injury, right? He had a major knee injury. So seeing Foster Moreau play more of the snaps here is not necessarily surprising. And I think as Juwan Johnson gets healthier and healthier, as he gets more confident post-injury, that's going to flip, right? And Moreau is going to start playing less and Juwan Johnson's going to start playing more. So once Juwan Johnson is the one playing the more snaps, I think maybe then you can look at possibly adding him off the wire. Alvin Kamara dominated the snaps early. He dominated the touches early, and he didn't play after halfway through the third quarter or the fourth quarter. That's when Jamal Williams got all his snaps, all his carries, all of that stuff. I would not look at this at face value. Alvin Kamara was got the goal line touchdown. He was completely dominating in the passing game, caught all 5 of his targets, had all 15 carries through the first 2.5 quarters, and then didn't play anymore after that. So, I think if you have Kamara, you feel very good about his role. Obviously, very easy matchup against Carolina in week 1. So in the more difficult matchups, don't expect 19 half PPR points, right? But if he can get you to, 10, 12 in half PPR with his passing game floor, I think that's definitely something that you're interested in keeping around and continue to start. On the Panthers side of the ball, so Adam Thielen. So, of course, he ran the most routes. Of course, he had 4 targets and led the team in receiving with 47 yards. Deontay, he had 6 targets. Leggett had 7 targets. Mingo had 5 targets. So it was not focused on Deontay Johnson in the way that we were led to believe in the offseason. In this first game, I think, too, maybe it was a little bit of defensive coverage, but I do hope to see that this changes moving forward. I do hope that the targets are more concentrated on Deontay Johnson, and getting him up in the 9-10 target range moving forward would be something that I would prefer as a very heavily invested in Deontay Johnson owner. I didn't start him anywhere in this week. I did say if you have him, try to see how this plays out. This is not how I wanted to see it play out, with everybody playing relatively the same number of snaps, and with Bryce Young throwing 2 picks and looking very, very bad behind a shaky offensive line. I do think that this offense is going to be tough to trust until we see them get in any sort of rhythm here. So I hope Canales can right the ship after this terrible performance in week 1. The running backs here show a very poor story here, right? 32 to 22 snaps with Chuba Hubbard and Miles Sanders, same number of carries. Mike Boone even got in there for 4 carries. I think that was in garbage time at the end of the game, so don't worry about Boone, right? But the Chuba Hubbard and the Miles Sanders break is something that will render Chuba Hubbard not useful. You can't play him. And honestly, with Brooks possibly coming back in week 5, week 6, week 7, and he's going to be up to full speed by week 8 type of thing. If you're not starting Chuba Hubbard, he is 100% a cut. You can just drop him for J.K. Dobbins. You can drop him for Rashid Shaheed. You can drop him for Josh Downs if he's still on your waiver wire. Like those type of guys, you can drop him even for Xavier Leggett, is somebody on his own offense who got 7 targets, looked pretty good. I think you can go with. So maybe he turns it around and ends up being semi-useful, but you're not starting him next week. And if this continues, you're never going to end up playing him. So I don't think that's something that you need to necessarily hang on to. It's something that if he looks good or dominates the snaps next week, you can kind of try and go back to him on the waiver wire. But even then, you're not playing him week 3 either, even if he has a strong role, because of the concern about this. So go ahead and cut Chuba Hubbard if you have him. Nobody has Miles Sanders. Leave him. For the Vikings, I thought Sam Darnold played pretty well. I've heard mixed information on him, but I thought he played pretty well. So, Jefferson, if you have him, you're starting him. Addison left with an ankle injury, so follow his progress through the week. I hope he can play, but it's the same ankle that he's been dealing with since the preseason. He left, and then Naylor immediately caught a touchdown on his only target. So, that probably would have been Addison's had he not been hurt. So, Addison, hopefully he can get that ankle right going into next week. Aaron Jones and Ty Chandler, they did split, 30-20. So I do think 60-40 split is what we expected coming in to the year. That was played true in the snap share. So I do think, Ty Chandler is somebody I added him and dropped J.K. Dobbins before the year. So I feel very, very upset about that one. But, protecting my number 2 running back and seeing how productive Aaron Jones was and knowing that Ty Chandler can be a very productive back, I think is something I'm okay with having for now. So Jones, 92 or 94 yards on 14 carries, just super explosive, very, very productive running back. I do think that they're going to limit his touches in this way, right? Just to try and keep him healthy. And that's what I hope they do, right? Even if you have to deal with the, 35 yards on 14 carries and 2 for 10 with no scores every once in a while, I'd rather have him have these spike weeks when he's healthy every single week than have to worry about him getting pushed up to 20 plus touches and, not be out there. Giants, so bad on offense. Daniel Jones is so bad. Malik Neighbors, 70 snaps, 50 routes, 7 targets. And he had 5 for 66. That I think was very good. The scoring opportunities are just going to be so low on this offense. So I really hope, he can kind of figure that out moving forward. Wandale, a lot of targets right next to the line of scrimmage. I think he had 8 catches for like 35 yards or something like that. That's not something you really want. In a deep league, if you want to pick him up or if you own him in a deep league, I think it's okay. It's okay to have him, but overall, not really interested in trying to secure Wandale on the waiver wire this week. Devin Singletary obviously dominated the snap share. That's what we expected. Workhorse role. I know not a ton of carries, but the offense was so bad in this game, and Minnesota had the ball so much in this game that, in games where they can keep it more competitive, Singletary will be better. Chargers. So Ladd McConkey, great game, right? He led the team in targets. He caught 5 for 40 and a touchdown. His touchdown was a very impressive play. Go see it if you haven't yet. Kind of juked out 2 guys and then got to just kind of step into the end zone. So very excited about McConkey as a Charger fan. Joshua Palmer wasn't great, honestly. I expected more from him, but I think getting the number 1 outside coverage is going to be something that's going to be a little bit more difficult for him to overcome. So if you have him, you can hang on to him because he did obviously play the most snaps. So in games where they're trailing, I expect him to be more involved. And Quentin Johnston was honestly more involved than I thought, right? Obviously, if you have DJ Chark, cut him everywhere, right? Didn't even get on the snaps here. And Quentin Johnston was definitely playing in that number 3 role. I'm not picking him up yet, but he did look better than I was expecting, and he did play a lot more than I was expecting. So there's that. Ignore the tight ends here. And then I mentioned earlier J.K. Dobbins a couple times as an ad. He outsnapped Gus. Gus had more carries than him, but just because he kind of racked up more early. And it's also hard to get additional carries if you're J.K. Dobbins when you rip off an 11-yard touchdown, a 43-yard run, and a 61-yard run. Like when those are your drives and you kind of just like get it all in one play, you're not going to get as many carries. So he had 135 yards and a touchdown on these 10 carries. He looked very good. And if he's healthy, this is somebody that you for sure want to have on your team. Raiders, Devontae Adams, 6 targets, second to Bowers in targets. So I thought that was interesting. 5 for 60. This is a decent game, but I do hope for a bigger volume share in the future. They didn't run very many plays, 60 plays, didn't throw the ball a ton. So I do hope to see that he can get more volume moving forward. Jacoby Myers, 3 targets, turned that into 63 yards. He's just a very consistent producer, very productive player, always, with his touches. And Bowers, I thought was great. If you have Bowers, you're definitely starting him next week. And there's a case to be made that he's already going to be a top 5 tight end based on how bad the tight end landscape was this week and how concentrated targets he got in this offense. So I was not expecting to see this much work for him. I know Matt is going to do a little bit of I told you so, but I think overall this is good for Bowers. And then the breakdown between Zamir White and Alexander Mattison, I think they were just down, and Madison's the passing down back. So you see the 6 targets he did score, but 13-5 on the ground, I'm not sure what to make of that, honestly. Like, I mean, if they're going to be losing a lot of games and Zamir White's not going to be on the field a lot, he might just drop all the way out of the top 30. So I hope that doesn't happen. I obviously told you guys to draft Zamir White. I was very aggressively pursuing Zamir White. I had him in my top 20 running backs in the preseason, so I do hope that they kind of figure out a way to get him going on the ground. Seahawks. So we have the Metcalf, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and Tyler Lockett split, right? You look at the box score, and you're going to see Tyler Lockett with the most catches and the most yardage and the most targets, right? So he had more targets than both of them combined. He had more catches than both of them combined. He had more yards than both of them combined. But JSN played in 2 wide receiver sets over Tyler Lockett. If you can buy low on JSN this week, do it. I promise you're not going to regret it, especially if you can be buying really low on him after he had a very, very poor game from a production standpoint wise. If this is going to be the snap share, it is going to be different moving forward. I promise you that. Tyler Lockett is going to be productive on his snaps, but if he's playing half or 50% less in the snap share, he is not going to be outproducing these guys in very many other games. Go get JSN. I have nothing to talk about really with the tight ends. Noah Fant, 4 targets, deep league option. Geno was decent. If you have him in 2 quarterback leagues, we'll talk about him as a start sit this week. And Ken Walker, make sure you watch this injury because he did get hurt. He left the game and did not come back. If he's not able to play, Zach Charbonnet is a scoop and start in week 2. The Denver Broncos, really the only thing to see here is Cortland Sutton, 11. I think he had 12 targets. I think that's another error there. 12 targets. Dominated the work in the passing game. Obviously didn't have a very productive game. If you have Sutton, you're keeping him. Maybe keep him on the bench until him and Bo Nix get a little bit better chemistry and can start connecting on more of those targets. Devon Vele, we talked about him getting added in a ton of leagues. He had 8 targets, 8 catches, all close to the line of scrimmage, so he only had like 40 yards. But interesting in deep leagues, dynasty leagues. And then Javonte and Jaleel McLaughlin split up pretty close to how we would expect. I think McLaughlin got a little bit more carries towards the end of the game. So I would expect Javonte to get more carries than him moving forward pretty much across the board. But it is interesting to see McLaughlin with the 6 targets. That's kind of, again, what we expected. Deep league add on your bench, and, if you play in one of these deep leagues, like these guillotine formats, you can get him into your starting lineups in a flex. Dallas. So Brandon Cooks played more than CeeDee Lamb. I think CeeDee Lamb, again, snap count, getting a little bit up to speed. 10 targets was pretty good with those targets. He didn't score. So obviously you're going to feel like you have a little bit left out there. But I do think, obviously, CeeDee Lamb, lock and loaded start. Brandon Cooks is definitely a waiver wire target, right? If he ran out here, he was out there for pretty much every single passing game snap, ran 30 routes, 7 targets. This is a role that's going to matter, especially if Jake Ferguson is going to miss time. There might be one of these other tight ends that can kind of fill in, but Jake Ferguson has a knee injury that is going to force him out, MCL sprain. So he is not going to be playing for the next month, probably. I expect Brandon Cooks to be productive during that time. Ezekiel Elliott and Rico Dowdle pretty much split even with the snaps. That's what we were expecting to see. Pretty much even with the carries, close, a couple less for Rico, 1 less target for Rico. Zeke got the touchdown. So, everybody's going to be looking at Zeke as the more productive player. I would still personally rather have Rico. The Browns, Deshaun Watson was terrible in this game. I don't understand how he got to be so bad. But anyways, we are where we are. Amari Cooper, 2 for 16, very, very poor game, but he still had 9 targets, dominated the target share. I think that he's going to continue to do that. I think he can even get more targets if the offense is playing better. It's on the field for more, for more time. They did play quite a few snaps here, right? They played 76 snaps. So hard to argue with that, but I think his upside for volume is even higher. I mentioned earlier, David Njoku got hurt. Keep an eye on him. If he's out, I think the targets should be even more concentrated on Amari Cooper. Jerome Ford dominated here, right? Dominated the carries, dominated the targets, 15.5 or 15.9 half PPR points. If you have him, you have to be starting him moving forward until Nick Chubb is back. And even once Nick Chubb is back, I think you keep starting him. Bucks obviously did not expect to see Jalen McMillan run the most routes or have the most snaps, right? Obviously, Godwin and Evans were awesome in this game. McMillan did have his first catch and his first touchdown in this game. So, seeing that he was out there so much is very encouraging. If you have McMillan, if you don't have McMillan, put him on your watch list. I don't think he's very widely owned, but this is something where Baker looked great. It was obviously a very easy matchup, but if this offense is going to be humming like they were today, 4 touchdowns, and there is ever an injury to Godwin and Evans, and McMillan's already been playing on a ton of snaps, this is somebody that's going to turn into like a handcuff for one of these guys and can definitely grow into a bigger role if pending an injury. So keep an eye on McMillan for sure. Nothing to see here on the tight ends. Otton obviously played a lot, didn't really do much. Rachaad White and Bucky Irving. This was why I was a little bit apprehensive on Rachaad White. He did have 15 carries and 5 targets. Very productive on the targets, not very productive on the carries. Bucky Irving had 9 carries and was more productive on his 9 carries than White was on his 15. So keep an eye on the split here, right? Obviously, Rachaad White still dominated the snap share. Rachaad White's going to continue to dominate the touches, but Bucky Irving is somebody that's going to continue to linger. And if you have White, wouldn't be the worst idea in the world to get Irving on your team. All right, Commanders. So we have Jaden Daniels was the main news story here. He had 2 rushing touchdowns. He had a ton of rushing production and was excellent in fantasy because of that. 28 points. Brian Thomas dominated touches early until this game got out of hand, and then they kind of gave it to Eckler to wrap up the game. But you can see the split even in the carries. This is Brian Robinson's backfield. If you have him, you can start him if you need him. And by weeks, he's going to be an excellent player to have. Went really late in drafts. McLaurin dominated the snap share. Luke McCaffrey was second. So I do think that that's interesting to note. He had 3 targets. I think he only 13 yards. They didn't do much in the air. But if he's going to continue to be out there with any sort of regularity, just watch and follow how he. All right, the Rams. So Cooper Kupp dominated snaps, dominated targets, and dominated the game in the air for the Rams. This was unbelievable. I did not think that this was going to happen like this. This is awesome. So for him, right, 14 catches, over 100 yards, 110 yards, and a touchdown. He was excellent. Puka got hurt, so that's why his snap share was so low. Keep an eye on his knee. This is very unfortunate for him. Matt Stafford was decent. Unfortunately, they weren't able to pull out the win, but they did come back from a 17-3 deficit. So that was great for him to see. And Kyron Williams, again, people were worried about his snap share or how much he was going to play because he was going to take punt returns. This, I think, shows everything. Like, do you notice who's not even on here? Blake Corum had 0 carries, 0 snaps, so he had 18 and 3. It was all Kyron, spelled a little bit by Ronnie Rivers. This is going to be Kyron's backfield. If you drafted him, you should feel very confident in his role, very confident in starting him every week. And then last team that we're going to talk about here, the Lions. Amon-Ra St. Brown led the team in snaps, but he was terrible. He only had 3 catches for 13 yards. Jameson Williams out-targeted him, outproduced him significantly, 5 for 120 and a touchdown. I don't expect that's going to happen very often, but Jameson Williams was a very, very highly touted prospect, was an early first-round pick. This is not some out-of-nowhere prospect, right? He struggled with injuries. And this is his 3rd year, kind of having a breakout here possibly. And that could really shake up the complexion of this wide receiver room for how dominant Amon-Ra had been in the targets. And if that's not going to be the case, then I'm definitely worried about Amon-Ra as somebody who had him ranked as 3rd and somebody who drafted him in my main league. So stay tuned on this one because, this isn't they're both going to be out there for all of the plays, right? So this isn't something either where it's going to be, Jameson Williams is going to take a step back. He's not going to. Goff was iffy in this game. I thought he was going to be much better than this. Hopefully he looks better moving forward. And then Gibbs and Montgomery split the snaps evenly, but Montgomery, many more carries, many more yards on the ground, and played all of the overtime drive, which kind of fueled his numbers a lot because he scored the touchdown there. He had 30 yards on that drive too. So again, both of these guys are great. You see the passing game work. Like Gibbs got the 6 targets. He had 4 catches for 35 yards. So that's obviously going to be awesome in any league where you can, count the receptions, right? If you're in half point or full PPR, that is That's excellent to see from him, especially with the hamstring injury, right? Getting 17 opportunities right off the bat, I think is something that's very encouraging for Gibbs. All right. And with that, we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Let us know down below if you like this format. If not, maybe we change it up, because this ended up being a lot longer than I thought it was going to be. And we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks.